Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to our second virtual high-level forum on UN-GGIM. To those that were able to be with us exactly a week ago, last Tuesday, welcome back. To those who may be joining us for the first time, welcome, and hope you actually have a great experience with us all today. Colleagues, as most of you will be aware, last week we gave an overview of the geospatial landscape at our first virtual high-level forum, and we introduced the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, as well as the next edition of the Future Trends Report, Geospatial Information Management. Today, as we promised last week, we're going to spend this entire 3-hour session talking more and delving more into the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, particularly the implementation guide and the country-level action plans. So let me just give a bit of a synopsis. We're going to go through each of the strategic pathways through 3 separate presentations, which I'll get to in just a moment. And after our second break, we will also have some country examples in terms of country-level action plans from 2 of our countries that have started the journey on an action plan towards implementing the IGIF. I will give a very brief overview soon, and this is a request from last week, of our first chapter, Solving the Puzzle, which talks a little more about the differences between the IGIF and NSDIs, National Spatial Data Infrastructures, or SDIs, as some of us are used to them. But before doing that, I would like to introduce our first 3 distinguished speakers that will be with us today. All of them have many, many years of experience. They have all worked in governments in their respective countries, in the United States, Australia and United Kingdom, but they all now are experts in their own right, working as independent consultants. So they are, first of all, Mr. Tim Traynor, who was the Chief Geographer previously and the Chief Scientist of the US Census Bureau. And Tim will be talking through the first of the 3 strategic pathways, pathways 1, 2, and 3, what we term as the governance pillar of the IGIF. Following Tim, we will have Dr. Leslie Arnold. Leslie, from Australia, used to work for many, many years in Western Australian government, and she has a lot of experience, particularly in the technical aspects of developing systems and the data life cycle and data supply chains that go into SDIs and information systems. She will talk through strategic pathways 4, 5, and 6, the technology pillar of our IGIF. Following their 2 presentations, we will then have a small break just for 5 minutes as a comfort/drink break. And then we will come back and have a presentation from Mr. John Kedar, who formerly was with both the military and the Ordnance Survey of the United Kingdom. John is going to talk through what we term as the people pillar, strategic pathways 7, 8, and 9. Now, they are all going to do their presentations in their own way. This is not choreographed. They will not be going Tim, 1, 2, 3, Leslie, continuing on. They will give different perspectives from their understandings and their experiences in the development of the IGIF. You'll note I say in the development of the IGIF, Tim, Leslie and John have been part of a core team that has worked on both the overarching framework, part 1 of the IGIF over the last year to 18 months, and have also been heavily involved in the development of this implementation guide. So there really is no better qualified people to talk to these quite detailed topics. Colleagues, you will also see, as we did last week, we have questions, there is a chat box for you as well where you can log questions in, and we will attempt to answer them as much as we can. We've also learned a little bit from last week where some of your feedback said, can you give us more time for questions and answers? So what we intend to do at the end of our first part of the program this morning is allow a considerable amount of time for questions and answers. And after a second comfort break, we will then go into our country case studies, and following that have further question and answer sessions. So we're anticipating, with luck and good management, we will have up to an hour of time for questions and answers. So please do log those questions as you go. So into the program now, what I will first do is give a bit of an overview of the IGIF in terms of the first component, solving the puzzle. Again, a slide from last week just to set the frame. Last week we talked about the overarching strategic framework, why geospatial information is important to countries. Today we're going to focus on the what and then the how, when and who, country level action plans. This particular session is dedicated to the implementation guide, the what. One of the key components of developing the implementation guide with its 9 strategic pathways was the need to have an overview of what that implementation guide was going to look like. So what we developed was solving the puzzle. Again, a slide that was shown last week, and I won't go into detail. It's just a screenshot of those first few pages of the implementation guide. But really what is it about? It expands on the strategic pathways. It provides in more detail what we mean when we say what are the specific guidance and options to be taken by countries implementing this IGIF. Each of the 9 strategic pathways is a uniformly structured chapter and captures the strategic right down to the operational needs, with guiding principles, with actions, with interrelated actions, deliverables, outcomes, and resources. And I've underlined interrelated actions in particular because this is where we have many actions in each of the individual strategic pathways, but they connect and have a relationship with each other in many, many situations. And we've given examples in the Solving the Puzzle chapter to help you through that process and to give some understanding there. It also describes the guide, the structure, the shape, the form, how it is put together, how we manage the guide in future years. And also it has a section in there that talks a lot about the validation of the implementation guide with more than 100 countries from around the world. It tells us how the guide should be best used and managed, and has connections directly into the country level action plans. And Tim, Leslie and John will go through all of these elements for you in just a moment. It also importantly captures linkages to the NSDI. And a key point is that the IGIF builds on the previous efforts in planning and implementing NSDIs. It does not replace them, it builds upon them. And I would like to now spend some time this morning explaining how we've articulated the differences between the IGIF and the NSDI, and hopefully the additional benefit and value that the IGIF is able to bring to the development of NSDIs within countries. First of all, the virtues of NSDIs. A key point here is that they have been in existence for a long time. Excuse me, just jumped one forward. They've been in existence for many, many years, 20 plus more years. The real virtues of NSDIs are their ability to promote geospatial data sharing throughout all levels of government and through society. They really are about enabling geospatial data to be available, to be discoverable, accessible, and usable. But there's now three factors that we believe are starting to challenge the limitations of our traditional view of NSDIs. The first is that the principal focus, as I've just mentioned, is that NSDIs have been really about creating and maintaining an NSDI, a National Spatial Data Infrastructure, a supply and demand data chain. It's not necessarily been about developing more broader cross-government national geospatial capability. While it's really core to a national program, what's needed more nowadays is the need to establish or maintain an integrated national geospatial program. And past efforts in achieving NSDIs have been more about the arrangements of an SDI rather than developing this national capability across priority societal, economic, and environmental decisions. In other words, a key element of the IGIF is linking it to national drivers, national strategies, and national needs. The second limitation that we're starting to see is that the recent and growing availability of so much data, more diverse, higher resolution, more dynamic, different data types, different needs, different users, different requirements that are really more relevant and dependent now on location and the location element of geospatial data than were originally considered when we think about our very structured SDI databases. This reflects both a technology evolution, but also the new and emerging data ecosystem that we talk about a lot in the IGIF. It's about not only location, but it's about integration. We not only need to know where we are, we need to know what data helps us in our decision making. And even though we talk about the new technologies and I guess disruptive data and technology enablers, it's this both structured and unstructured data and other realities that are now pressuring the limitations on our current SDI processes. The third limitation tends to be around following up on integration is the need for more analytics. Historically, NSDIs have been quite structured repositories of geospatial information that tend to be defined and managed as separate data sets and themes. But today what we're seeing is a shift more to a user-centric and user-driven perspective. So these data and assets now that are more dynamic, more diverse, are really needing to be leveraged much more than what they have been in the past. They need to be more flexibly and readably used than they have been in the past. So diversity with specificity has been a key challenge for us. We need more data and more data types, but we kind of need it now. And these are changing some of these requirements for us. A key point, as I mentioned, is that what we are trying to do with the IGIF is ensure that it complements the NSDI. It's not about changing it. So the IGIF is offering a new paradigm and a means and a comprehensive mechanism to further strengthen our nationally integrated geospatial information and the desired transformational change that many of us and many countries in the world are striving for and need. The IGIF provides a more holistic and integrated information system of systems approach to the data life cycle. And this approach and the comprehensive guidance that comes with it for countries recognises the importance of capacity and capability development right from the outset. It's like you can have an aspirational desire, but it's how do we bring capability and capacity to that? And this is really where the country level action plans have a role to play. They create an enabling environment for this to be achievable. Now, my last few slides, but I guess the key difference here you can see with the IGIF, the 9 strategic pathways. And in essence, when we think about how it augments and builds upon the NSDI, this is really, I guess, what would be the typical and well understood practices and processes of NSDIs. And you can see that there's differences. There's differences in what the IGIF now has to offer to build upon those already available capabilities. So I will just conclude with one last slide here, if I can get back to this picture. My mouse is jumping around on me. One of the challenges we've also seen, and this is some images from one of several workshops that we've convened over the last year or so, in this case in Kigali in Rwanda, with the 5th meeting of UN-GGIM Africa, but also with Africa GIS. And we've had many discussions on the virtues of the IGIF versus NSDIs. And a key point that has now resonated is that for many years, developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, have been trying to implement unsuccessfully a real strong structure on NSDIs and in older ways of doing things. What the IGIF is now offering is a newer way, a new message, a new methodology, and a new paradigm for countries to move forward without thinking so much about the very defined structures that we've considered in the past. So I hope that helps, and I'm sure we'll get a number of questions on this, but that's a bit of a quick overview on the relationship between the linkages of the IGIF and the NSDI. So with that, I would like to now hand over to Tim Trainer. As I mentioned, he's not only had a long history in geospatial, he was also a co-chair of UN-GGIM for a period of time. And now he's also, as if he has nothing else to do, president of the ICA, the International Cartographic Association. So Tim, over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and good day to everyone. I'm just trying to advance the slides on my side. There we go. Okay. This first presentation focuses on governance for national leadership in geospatial information management. Each of the 9 pathways offer a wide array of information for each of us. One nugget of advice that I would offer to you is to make time to read the strategic pathways that are important to you and do it in an order that's important to you. As a suggestion, I would begin with the first chapter on solving the puzzle that Greg just introduced to us because it gives a good overview. For the topic today, the primary objective, and I'm having trouble advancing this. Sorry. There we go. Okay, thanks. The primary focus of this presentation is on 3 governance strategic pathways and their key elements. We'll first introduce the importance of governance, followed by a description of each of the 3 strategic governance pathways. Each pathway has lots of detail in the respective chapter for you to read, to study, and to reference as appropriate to each of your circumstances. And as governance is one of the influencers, similar to technology and people, the first strategic pathway is governance and institutions. And as an influencer, I will spend a little bit more time on that topic. So Greg presented an excellent overview of part 2 of the implementation guide during the first day of the high-level forum. And as he mentioned, today we go into more detail with the 3 influencers of governance, technology, and people. This first presentation focuses on the role of governance in implementing and maintaining an integrated geospatial information framework. Because governance helps an organization achieve its objectives and therefore its mission, in the context of the IGIF, governance is the solar power that guides the strategic pathway to its accomplishments. For many countries, early efforts at coordinating geospatial activities was informal. It was a meeting of the willing. Before too much time passed or passes, there's usually a recognition that more formal arrangements are needed. And in your efforts at standing up and maintaining a national geospatial program, spending more time and attention on the first strategic pathway, governance and institutions, is time well spent as it impacts all of the other strategic pathways. Here are some examples of positive influences of governance. Integration is one of the unique ingredients of the IGIF, and it can be complicated. Governance helps in managing integration. There is a great value in existing NSDIs, as Greg just outlined. Governance sustains the importance of the NSDI and builds on expanded responsibilities of the IGIF. An IGIF is country-specific, and it is important to continually ask how the IGIF responds to and supports national priorities, national needs, and national circumstances. From last week's presentations, you know about the three parts of the IGIF. While we focus today on Part 2, the implementation guide, governance is closely aligned with Part 1 because leaders understand the importance and value of governance in managing and improving programs. So there's a close connection between governance and Part 1 of the IGIF. You will see today examples of interlinkages between different strategic pathways. Governance permeates through each strategic pathway. So for example, here I offer a light example of applying governance. One part glue. It helps to join the strategic pathways in a common approach for success. One part rules to guide the process through consistency and understanding. One part traffic cop to monitor the application of the rules to be sure things are working according to plan. And one part judge to make decisions for new influences and at key points and to resolve impacts when rules are not followed. So let me give you an example of the judge. Over time, things change. National priorities may change, or national circumstances certainly change. You can't control the weather, so you have to respond to it. At the same time, technology changes. We didn't have drones 10 years ago. We didn't have access to small satellites 10 years ago. So as these new influences come in, decisions need to be made about how to apply those new technologies or to address those national circumstances. So that's why governance helps in managing that. So governance is about getting organized. Defining roles and responsibilities is important so everyone knows and understands their part in the effort. Working together on developing a high-level execution plan with key milestones that include dates for achieving those milestones is the first step in a country-level action plan. And this type of activity forms the basis of what is to follow. The geospatial environment is not static. It continually responds to changing needs, new technology, and the creativity of people. How does one manage the current state while considering changes to that current state? Now, to do a deeper dive, applying sound principles of project management to address changes, to address risks and their mitigations, to monitor schedules and the adjustments to those schedules that may be needed, budgets, resources, and performance indicators all lead to a more successful outcome. So as a first step, it's suggested to follow the guidance offered in the 4 key elements of each strategic pathway. And for governance and institutions, efforts begin with the establishment of a governance model, followed by identifying the leadership team. And next, defining the roles and responsibilities for tasks as part of the institutional arrangements across government. Lastly, establishing a process for measuring and monitoring progress that contribute to the value proposition. So the IGIF is a forward-looking framework. It's built on national needs and circumstances. It provides a basis and guide for developing, integrating, and strengthening geospatial information. The strategic framework provides the strategic messages and integrated national framework, focusing on policy perspectives and elements of sound, effective geospatial information management. It's a mechanism and opportunity for articulating and demonstrating national leadership, cultivating champions, and developing the capacity to take positive steps. The key messages here are that frameworks require cooperative governance. Strong leaders, not weak or ineffective leaders, are needed to be successful. Most of what we do depends on knowledge, skills, and abilities of those responsible for success. Strength in these areas improve the outlook for success. Collaboration requires sharing. Collaboration opens the tent to all sectors. Governance helps in defining common priorities and goals. Now we begin with the first of the four key elements of governance in institutions. The governance model reflects the national strategy and illustrates which organizations are involved and what responsibilities they have. The governance model is the roadmap for how coordination occurs across all levels of government and with the other sectors. Partnerships are critical to the success of implementing the governance model. Each point in this slide highlights a key word for your attention. Strategy. It's a critical component for an integrated national geospatial program. Without a strategy, you will have chaos and conflict. The vision communicates what the IGIF looks like in your country when it is in place. Part two, the implementation plan of the IGIF, is the what, as Greg has said several times. And this was intentional so that each of us had information, details, and substance to guide us through the process. It does not tell us how to do it. That is the role of the country-level action plan, which is prescriptive and specifies how your organization achieves its mission, vision, and objectives. Each of us in this endeavor is a leader. Those supporting us who sit above and those who make our success possible are all leaders in this enterprise. Everyone needs to be a champion to the IGIF in order to realize its success. This is a, I skipped one of the slides, sorry. The value proposition communicates why the IGIF is important for meeting national priorities, national needs, and national circumstances. To gain support for the IGIF, leaders must be convinced that this is needed and it's a good idea. Political leaders and those responsible for budget and finance commitments need assurances. While offering career opportunities, having sufficient resources to accomplish the work requires information that shows the value of the investment, while explaining what conditions are needed to sustain the program in the future. This leads us back to good project management, where monitoring and measuring progress helps shape communication on the national economic benefits and public good of integrated geospatial information. Now, to summarize the pathway on governance and institutions, good governance enables geospatial information challenges to be met head-on. It provides flexibility to accommodate the rapidly changing environment. It strengthens the ability to embrace community and business participation within a culture of digital reform and transformation. Now we move on to the policy and legal strategic pathway, and here we look at legislation, policies, norms and guides, governance and accountability, and data protection, licensing, and sharing. For a national geospatial organization, this is a chapter you should read carefully. Policy and legal considerations are country-specific and oftentimes require consideration on different levels and with various players. Attention in assuring that the right balance is considered between openness or access and restriction. These are addressed effectively in considering the full potential of geospatial information and the management of that information. Engage with your legal experts in your organization. If you have not engaged with them previously, this is the time to work with them. Share what you do for a common understanding of geospatial responsibilities and seek their guidance for your work. It is better to engage with your legal team early in your work. Leaving it to when issues become problems may reduce your options. Like planning and decisions on information technology, having early and continual dialogue with legal experts helps assure a better process. Policy and legal considerations contribute to a robust policy and legal framework that is essential for instituting effective, efficient, and secure management and exchange of geospatial information, both at the national level and at subnational levels. These considerations impact other strategic pathways. These instruments, some of which are binding, while others are non-binding, address the wide range of policy and legal issues that impact the collection, integration, use, storage, and distribution of geospatial information. Examples of other policies and legislation include e-government, for example, national security, privacy, intellectual property rights, data availability, open data, standards, education topics, and statistical and administrative data. Fostering the action of policy development is a building block for better geospatial information management. So now we begin the 4 key elements for policy and legal. And under legislation, there are laws and regulations in some cases. The second point on closely related topics could include examples such as privacy, liability, and intellectual property rights management. For policy norms and guides, they include common sense and common practice aspects. They can be aspirational and apply to non-binding features of a policy and legal framework. Let's see, I lost something here. Here we go. The use of agreements between 2 organizations is an example of the key elements of data protection, licensing, and sharing. Agreements are a good tool for collaboration among different organizations. Governance and accountability involve sound and effective leadership, mechanisms for compliance toward effective geospatial information management, and the designation of the parties involved. For example, which agencies are involved and possibly the contact points for each of those agencies. Now, the third strategic pathway for this section on governance is financial, and the key elements include business model, opportunities, benefits realization, and investment. The financial strategic pathway establishes the business model, it develops the financial partnerships, and identifies the investment needs and means of financing for delivering an integrated geospatial information management program. It also recognizes the benefits realization milestones that will achieve and maintain the momentum that's necessary. The financing required will typically come to fruition when governments can see evidence that geospatial information will deliver social, economic, and environmental benefits to the country, and that there is a corresponding and credible plan to realize these targeted benefits. The plan links back to Strategic Pathway 1 on governance and institutions. Financial management is accomplished through financial policies, plans, sound financial controls, and accountability, and making financial decisions such as those needed for procurement and utilization of funds, all of which are achieved according to general management principles. An investment plan includes current funding sources, obligations, and estimates of future years. And new funding initiatives are identified to meet those priorities. So that also has to be taken into account. And lastly, there's a financial accounting of each of the costs associated with all aspects of the program. The business case, the reasons for financing the IGIF. Well, why is this investment activity important? What benefit does the country derive from its implementation? What problem or challenge is solved with this investment? These and other basic questions, simple questions, should drive the planning and decisions throughout the government process. If you keep coming back to these questions, that helps you to stay focused on the financial aspects. We now begin with the 4 key elements of the financial strategic pathway. A business model for the IGIF is a plan for the successful operation of an activity. It outlines how it will be economically successful and sustainable. The business model identifies the sources of funding and revenue, the intended user base, the products and services offered, and the details of financing. It is influenced by policy, legal, and fiscal governance. So you can see the interconnections of these things. Leaders need to take a longer view of the investment in IGIF, the opportunities that geospatial information offers toward basic social, environmental, and economic needs, priorities, and circumstances and opportunities. Having committed funding prior to the start of any work to strengthen integrated geospatial information management is paramount. Likewise, having funding for the continued maintenance of integrated geospatial data, products, and services is equally important. So if you look at the considerations on the slide, they provide guidance on developing a rationale for investment. The strategic case, why now? The economic case, what are the quantifiable benefits? The commercial case, the customers and partners, business, for example. The financial case, the funding sources, and of course you need the strategy. Okay, benefit realization can be thought of as a 3-step process. Identifying the benefits that can be reliably measured over time, establishing the key performance indicators that are to be used as the basis for evaluating and quantifying the benefits, and measuring the benefits in terms of the outputs delivered through the program. Generally, key performance indicators are established prior to implementation. However, they need to retain flexibility to be reviewed and revised as more is learned and the objectives, opportunities, and expected accomplishments evolve. And this is true for most aspects of finance. So, in summary, success in implementing a nation's IGIF is improved with a well-organized and structured governance plan. The governance and leadership notes that good governance and cooperative institutional arrangements are the first priority in the geospatial information reform agenda. A nationally integrated geospatial information program requires significant investment, but it has benefits in advancing the priorities and circumstances of a nation. And given that importance, having appropriate and constructive oversight is recommended. So with that, we've concluded the governance pathway, and the handoff is now on to Leslie, who will talk to us about the second pillar of the IGIF implementation plan.
Thank you, Tim, and hello everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to talk about the strategic pathways 4, 5, and 6, which is the technology pillar. I won't explain why we've included data and innovation and standards within the IGIF, because for our audience that's obvious. So what I will do is talk a lot more about what's actually in these pathways. Now, we look at data governance is mainly the focus of the strategic pathway 4 on data. I say that because we're not actually talking about the data collection methods as such. We know that you know them. We're really focusing here on how to get organized with the data themes, the processes from custodianship, acquisition, management, data curation and data delivery, and leading up to those data supply chains where how you get organisations to work together across government or at different levels of government to work in a coordinated way to integrate data. So that's all about data governance. And then when we look at innovation, again, it's not focusing necessarily on the technology as such, but more on the process of innovation. We talk about advances in technology, about process improvements. But the aim here is to enable countries to bridge the geospatial digital divide. And so we're looking at the process to enable that innovation and creativity. Under standards, we're talking here about the standards framework and how you can, as a country, can govern those standards, introduce them at a national standard. And the key here is, of course, integrating data, standards for integrating data, technical interoperability, and building that community of practice, because we find that in many countries there's not a lot of knowledge necessarily about standards and how to implement them, so there's some skills development there. And also finally around the compliance. How do you get people to work together to a common standard? So they're the three pathways and the key elements. Now, these key elements are really important. If we can achieve these key elements, then you're achieving or on your pathway towards integrated geospatial information management. The elements are achieved by completing the actions, and there's quite a considerable number of actions within each of these pathways. And they're there so that you can pick and choose from these actions and actually use them and place them in your country action plan. So these are activities that you can consider that need to be done. To make it easier, we've introduced also some tools as well. So accompanying each of the actions is a tool to help you deliver on those actions. And for my presentation, I'm going to really concentrate on these actions and the tools that have been included in these chapters, if you like. Now, what's really important is that for each chapter, we've got some principles, and the principles are actually guiding the actions and the tools. So they help. So it doesn't matter how you implement your action and the way you do it, as long as you do consider some of those fundamental principles. With these three, the technology pillar, the three strategic pathways, they've got some common outcomes. And here we're looking at trying to achieve an increased range and scope of integrated data. We're trying to make it discoverable, reusable, so it can be used for decision making, for national development initiatives and for innovation, of course, and enabling productivity improvements, particularly when we look at well-defined supply chains. So this means no duplication of effort. And of course, data technology and interoperability is a key thing. So if we can achieve these outcomes from these pathways, then we are able to reuse and repurpose this data, leading to the economic growth and improved quality of life for citizens, and also this ability to measure, monitor progress towards the SDGs, and as Tim mentioned, to achieve strategic priorities of government. Now, in the top right corner there, you see the pathway structure. Now, Greg presented on this last week, and I won't go through the structure this week, but I am going to draw out in particular the parts to talk about the key actions and those tools. And they're in a particular order. They're in the same order for every single pathway. And if you can't quite follow the arrows there, I've put the numbers up on the screen in red. But also, each pathway also has a suggested roadmap. You can't read it here, but when you get to these documents, you will be able to see them. So So let's have a look at the actions for Strategic Pathway 4. I'll take you through Pathway 4 in a little bit more detail than the others. Once you get the flow of how things work, I don't need to explain it for Pathways 5 and 6. So let's have a look at the actions, the first actions for Strategic Pathway 4, getting organised. Getting organised is all about organising the data itself, and it's about building the data framework. Now, there's actually a lot of work that's already been done by the committees of part of the UN-GGIM, and the UN-GGIM Subcommittee on Fundamental Data Themes has established 14 fundamental themes for you to consider as part of your data framework. So this is getting the data organised so that it's findable. Then we talk about developing these data set profiles. This is where you start gathering a little bit more information about the data. In this instance, on this example here, we've drawn out information about the characteristics of a data set, who governs that data set, and how it can be accessed and used. So this is a lot of information that you can start to gather. Now, of course, to do that, you also need to conduct a data inventory. And so we've provided questionnaires, a 3-page questionnaire for this one, to help you gather that evidence. So getting organised is about gathering evidence. I'll take you through a little bit more. We'll look at the next one, which is planning for the future. This is once you've developed your strategy, as what Tim talked about, you know where you're headed, what you want to try and achieve. You've done your inventory, so you know what data holdings you have, and now we need to actually conduct an analysis to see what gaps exist, what data do you have to collect. There is another tool there to help guide the thinking around that gap analysis. And the outcome from that is to actually develop a roadmap. Now, in the Pathway 4, we've actually included a roadmap which is readable. I realise you can't read it on screen. And it actually shows how you can get different organisations from across government, and if you're going from national to provincial level to village level, you can all work together towards collecting information that matters in the national interest. So these roadmaps are really important, tend to be driven from the national level, but of course a lot of the data does get collected at the local level, and this roadmap recognises that. Some of the other examples, I won't show the structure again, but I will show you on screen some of the other things we're talking about. Now, data governance is really important, and here we actually talk about some of the things you need to consider about how you govern your data. There's also an example of a data custodianship guidelines that you can adopt. These are actually important. Quite often data sharing is an issue. People don't like to be told to share their data, but they do like to be told they have responsibility for their data. So these custodianship guidelines are really useful. One of the responsibilities, of course, tends to be you have to share your data, but they're really good for getting buy-in. The other thing we've included is some data release guidelines. So sharing data is one thing, but actually how to do it, because there's always these concerns that you're releasing information that could be a national secret or private information. So we've included some guidelines to help countries make those decisions, and they can be used by the organisations. We also talk about the data life cycle and how important those different stages are, and I won't go into it in too much detail, and also about these supply chains, and this is quite critical. This is where you start engaging with business, with the different levels of government, and you'll notice from this diagram here, the key thing here is to not have duplication, but to share the information from the city levels up to the national levels, but the driver is in the other direction. The driver for the need for data typically is top down. Now, just over here, once you've actually got all these things organised, then you can actually start to do some, develop some programs where you can acquire data in the national interest using these national acquisition programs. So this is where you start purchasing data once and you can share it across a number of the different jurisdictions. So these are important. Again, the focus is on data governance. What we have included is information about improving the positioning infrastructure. We talk about instruments, datums, geodetic services, and we talk about the physical infrastructure. Now, this recognises that some countries actually don't have a geodetic infrastructure in place, but they do have projects that use temporary survey marks. And so this is helping them to actually build a simpler sense and positioning infrastructure. I want to make a point here that a lot of the work that is in these chapters doesn't actually take away from the work of the subcommittees for the UN-GGIM. And so we reference the documents that are being produced by these committees. And here, the Global Geodetic Reference Framework has been developed and has been approved by the Committee of Experts, and it's been developed by the Subcommittee on Geodesy. Again, we talk about geostatistical data integration, and the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information has put forward their global geostatistical framework, and that has now been adopted. What we have put in this chapter is how to actually potentially implement that framework. So let's move on to innovation. The innovation chapters was hard to write. All countries have different starting points when you consider their innovation. And it has a different context as well, because some countries, what they consider to be innovation may not be considered innovation in another country. And I take, for example, the cadastral records. In some countries, they're still in paper form, and actually moving and digitizing or just simply scanning them to start with is a significant move forward, because it suddenly makes that information far more accessible, and of course less risk to being damaged as well. So the innovation chapter focuses mainly on process. It does complement the Future Trends third edition document that we will talk about next week. It doesn't go into a lot of the future technologies, but does talk about some emerging ones. But again, the focus is more about on how you might take advantage of some of these emerging technologies through a process. Now, one of the objectives I mentioned earlier is bridging the digital geospatial divide. And of course, many countries are faced with a number of gaps, and those gaps are having poor internet access, suffering from power outages, not having the computing infrastructure available. And of course, there's also, if that's the case, then they don't have the ability to adopt some of these technologies. There's a lack of skills and knowledge in some of the ICT and the geospatial areas. Financing is quite difficult, and often there's a lack of awareness at a political level. And of course, those two combined deliver the third gap, which is the value, because that means that we're just not seeing that they have sufficient data in order to innovate and harness those emerging technologies to realise the benefits. So let's have a look at the innovation actions and the tools. And here again, it's about gathering information. It's about understanding your needs to innovate. And it's about considering where you can actually leapfrog to more modern technologies. or whether in some instances it's more appropriate to use an incremental innovation process. For example, where I mentioned about the cadastral plans being scanned in the first case, the next stage would be to digitise them to develop a fit-for-purpose cadaster before moving down the track. So incremental innovation is also a valid approach. There's also the need to build this capacity to innovate and build a culture of innovation as well. And so an innovation framework has been included in this pathway. The first part is, of course, setting direction, comes back to the strategy. Everything comes back to having a strategy, as Tim pointed out here. But it's also important to consider just where you are in terms of data technology, that maturity index. So we've included a IGIF generational bracket, moving from level 1, which is your analog mapping, moving right up to the integrated geospatial information management. And when you actually look at the index, and this index, while you may not be able to read it, it is in the document, you'll notice that actually down in that last column there, I don't know of any country that's actually achieved this full integration. We've really made it a stretch target here. So if I can just show you an example here. So for acquisition, some countries might be using still more the photogrammetric needs for their secondary data capture. In other countries, they've already adopted IoT sensors, machine learning and artificial intelligence for feature extraction, for example. So this is a good starting point to actually get people talking about innovation, where you are and where you want to go. And then, of course, you need to do a little bit more around the identification of needs. And we've included a capability framework in the chapter. So you can do this assessment, talk about your current situation, where you want to be, what the gaps are, and how you're going to enable those gaps to be filled. And again, I haven't got some examples here, but we have included a needs assessment and a gap analysis template for you to use to start gathering and analysing that information. So one of the key important things is the innovation system, and you'll see here innovation, it's about building this culture, and so there's a lot in the innovation system around capacity building, but of course here you've seen that second last line at the bottom there, it's about building that data infrastructure for the knowledge, your financial infrastructure, as well as your physical IT infrastructure. And of course up the top here, just below where it says innovation system, these are the driving forces of why you might want to innovate. What is the demand? Now, of course, innovation is in the centre of the puzzle, and it's there for a very good reason, because innovation has an impact on all the different pieces of the puzzle in each pathway, and also each pathway has an influence on innovation as well. So from the innovation system, you can build these innovation programs. Sometimes there's centres for excellence, innovation hubs, R&D, research and development programs. And it's from these programs that you start to see the innovative applications come out, whether they're to do with data analytics or products and services for decision making. So we talk about a number of technologies and methods, and I won't go into them here, you'll be familiar with them. But what we have done is actually said, well, there's a number of methods. So how do we start doing that digital transformation process? So in the pathway, it talks about this having a digital transformation strategy and how important it is, and looking at your communication strategies. What are you trying to achieve in terms of economies of scale or productivity or procurement efficiency and so forth? Okay, let's have a brief look at standards as well. Now, standards, it's good to mention them as third because they're actually a key enabler for data integration, system interoperability and innovation. Without the standards, you're not going to be able to achieve the integration which is so integral to the IGIF. Now, the standards development organisations have been partnered in developing the IGIF program and have written the pathway. They also want to draw your attention to the fact that there are two other documents, the standards guide and the companion document. And again, for more detail, this pathway links you to those two documents. So the standards organisations, ISO, OGC and the International Hydrographic Organisation have done a survey relatively recently, and they've identified a number of barriers to implementing standards. And you can see at the top there, lack of awareness for standards, lack of technical knowledge, cost of implementing standards can be high. Often there's no legislation, no policy to enable the implementation and so forth. Now, they've used these barriers as a guide to actually developing the information within these pathway actions. So the standards framework is the focus of the chapter. It's building that governance, it's raising awareness, it's gathering that evidence, identifying where standards are needed and where they're not being used, and developing an action plan. Another key aspect is the management of standards. So many countries do already have standards in place, but there's a need to continually review that standards program, continually build capacity. Standards are changing all the time. We're now moving into linked data. It's introducing whole new standards in semantic web. And of course, there's this compliance issue. Now, I'm sorry, I rushed through standards very quickly. And I think this is my time. So I'd like to finish off here. The technology pillar, data integration, data, innovation and standards. The key outcomes for these three pathways is to increase the range and scope of integrated data, of interoperability between data and technology, making information discoverable and reusable, enabling innovation, enabling productivity improvements, and building this robust data governance. And of course, the outcomes and the benefits, benefits leading from these outcomes is for improved decision-making for national development imperatives, new products and services, economic growth, and improved quality of life for citizens, and of course, monitoring and measuring progress towards the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Leslie and Tim, for some wonderful overview there of our first 6 pathways. Colleagues, we're going to have a quick break just for a few minutes, no more than 5 minutes. But before going to the break, we've got lots of questions that have come in. Please keep them coming, but a couple of really quick ones. The event is being recorded. The presentations will be available, and all of the resources that we've been talking about this morning are also on our UN-GGIM website under the IGIF. So all of the resources there, apart from at the moment, there's been a couple of questions, 2 chapters. The chapter on finance, chapter 3, pathway 3, will be up on our website in the next 2 days, and pathway 5 we're still trying to finalise and work on at the moment, so we'll have that available in the next week or so. The IGIF implementation guide is out for global consultation, and that concludes on the 26th of June this year. So for those that have been asking, yes, everything will be available or is available right now, so thank you for that. Lots of questions still to come. Thank you, Tim and Leslie. We have John straight after the break, and that's going to be in just 5 minutes' time. So please come back in that 5 minutes and we'll be starting again. Thank you so much.